right. Welcome, everyone. It is episode 3 of the Endurance Eat series. If you are an endurance athlete, runner, triathlete, cyclist, this video is for you. As my dietitian team and I are here, we're taking your nutrition and fueling questions and discussing them in depth. So I'm Alex of Alex Larson Nutrition, and I have with me my team members, Hannah Cooley and Mary Wirtz, both dietitians. We work one-on-one with endurance athletes from around the world, in addition to being athletes ourselves. So if you are new to this video series, don't forget to tap that subscribe button to get those alerts for future episodes as they get released. And if you have your own endurance nutrition questions and you'd love for us to discuss them here, head to the comments and ask. We will add it to our queue. All right, so let's get started here. We're going to kick this off with a really great question that I got on Instagram. And that question was, I'm a rower and I do 2 workouts every day, and I have been continually gaining weight. Is there a problem with my metabolism? I'm not trying to bulk. I see this question very often where they think there's something wrong with their metabolism, and like, how do they fix that? So Mary, I want you to lead this one off, but let's kind of discuss this. Let's discuss training a lot, seeing weight gain. What's the problem? What are some things that we would look at?
Yes, and if you've at all seen our other episodes, which of course I highly recommend, there's always that caveat, asterisk, it depends, because really the answer to this question is contingent on the individual. But by and large, my experience, and Alex and Hannah, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like so many people fall trapped to just blaming their metabolism. By and large, it's my metabolism, I'm getting older, it's slowing down, which certainly for some people can be very true. But I heard that person is active, very active. I would assume they're probably eating relatively nutritious, healthy foods. I would imagine that they're getting in some sort of resistance training. So I would predict that that person actually has a really good metabolism. So I think it's more so important to recognize that a lot of factors can really play a role here. There's going to be things like sleep and hydration. If that individual's not recovering well, there's probably a lot of chronic inflammation going on, which leads to more subsequent fluid retention. And then certainly nutrition can play a significant role. In my experience, this person could be underfueling, and on the opposite side of the spectrum, the person could be overfueling, and even a hybrid of the two. I would imagine that there's probably some sort of underfueling going on before the workout, during the workout, especially if they're doing 2 workouts a day, and that person may be backloading their calorie intake quite a bit, which we often see. So I do think that it would be a good idea to perhaps start with either tracking nutrition intake or even journaling simply with a piece of paper and a pencil, so you can really better understand some of those habits and patterns that are going on. I think journaling and food tracking gets a bad reputation recently in terms of kind of diet culture-esque world, but I do feel like for our athletes, by and large, it's a very effective tool to better hone in on some of those patterns that may be contributing to the unintentional weight gain. And furthermore, you can track and journal things other than just nutrition. You can, do the fluid intake, you can do sleep and stress and a lot of these other lifestyle factors to better pinpoint some of those things going on. What do you ladies think?
I would also say with like the journaling can be really helpful in not necessarily thinking of it as I'm going to put myself on a diet or I'm going to count calories or macros. Like, just think of it as a learning tool. It can be very enlightening to just do some journaling. But if you find that you're just journaling with no real like plan in place, like it is helpful to work with a dietitian because we can offer that like feedback and insight. And that's what we do in our one-on-one program is we have you do some journaling and we like evaluate it and compare it to what we ideally would want your nutrition to be and start filling in those gaps and teaching you how to adjust your nutrition accordingly and structure your day to best support your goals as an athlete and your body composition as well. But I I do feel like historically with a lot of the athletes that we see that are doing high volume, high frequency training, oftentimes like they have been underfueled for a really long time, and we do need to like bring their nutrition up to get their body like out of that stressful state, right? Because our metabolism does adapt over time if we've been underfueled to being able to perform at a certain level at the calorie level that they've been eating. So that could be one area where I'd say, they're depending on kind of other things that the athlete might be saying they're experiencing. Underfueling could be one. You kind of mentioned this too, Mary, where like we might see both underfueling and overfueling, where we're just seeing like massive inconsistencies, where some days they're just like binge eating and they're like going way over their calorie needs, and other days where they're like, oh my God, I ate so much yesterday, I'm going to like restrict today and kind of get cut back up. And so like it's that volatile nutrition that can be really harmful as well for body composition, because our body really likes consistency, and that like roller coaster of things can be difficult. And so you mentioned the term backloading. Let's kind of explain that a little bit, because we often say like we need a front load nutrition or backload. Like when you say those terms, what are you meaning?
What I meant by backload, and I see this a lot, and it's almost always unintentional with athletes because they haven't experimented with fueling while exercising in it enough. And so they're kind of timid and shy and scared of some unwanted GI issues, particularly with my runner athletes. So what happens is they eat a little bit, if anything, prior to their morning workout. They underfuel or not fuel at all during their run or their workout, perhaps have a small lunch, and they've kind of suppressed their appetite through the day for so long that inevitably they end up unintentionally, of course, just eating large amounts of food later on in the evening, and then also kind of grazing, snacking prior to bed to make up for the nutrition that they did not get in earlier in the day. That's kind of what I mean by backloading. And I see this with many of the clients that start our nutrition program. Many of the clients. What about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I was going to say that too. And it's just creating a cycle effect as well, because if you're eating a lot at night, you're likely waking up in the morning not actually that hungry because you're eating the majority of your calories in the evening. So you're kind of, in a sense, like perpetuating the cycle, because it's hard to force yourself to eat if you're like, well, I actually ate a lot last night. Is that food like technically still with me? And then a lot of people too have that fear that if they increase food in the beginning of the day, in the middle of the workout, are they still going to be that hungry in the evening? And it's just overall adding more calories. So in general, and we say this too, if you're adding more calories before your workout, you're just going to get more out of the workout, and it's actually igniting the recovery process before you even start. So I think it's just allowing yourself to break out of that pattern, because what you'll find is if you're increasing your calories early on, your body is smart. It is going to adapt, and you're likely not going to be as hungry in the evening as you were before you were not fueling.
When I jump on a brand new like athlete call, just seeing if they're like the right fit for the program, and they say things like, these are like my biggest red flags when I like get super, like I almost get a little giddy when they start saying these, because I'm like, oh, I know exactly what we're gonna do with you, and you're gonna feel so amazing. Yeah. But like when they say things like, I have sugar cravings in the afternoon or evening. I have like I just can't stop eating in the evening. I have a terrible like sweet tooth, or I'm always like just snacking on everything. If they tell me that they're not hungry during the day, that also is like a big red flag, because I'm like, or they're like, I'm never hungry in the morning for breakfast. I'm like, oh, but you will be. Like, give us a few weeks. Like that will change, because it's so interesting how like their hunger just comes back with a vengeance. It's like their body just kind of wakes up again. And what else do I hear? Like, if they're like really tired the rest of the day, especially if they're like a morning if they work out in the morning. Like there's just those classic things that I hear where I honestly like, I'm so sorry if this is weird, but I'm so excited about this because I know exactly what we're going to do with you and how I see the potential in you nutritionally and as an athlete, and it's very exciting. So those are like some classic signs that I see as well, where I'm like, oh yeah, we need to readjust where you're getting your nutrition in the day. And that's where we tend to see really good results in performance, but also in body composition.
And that's
absolutely.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag.
I just think about one of my clients who's gearing up for Grandma's Marathon in a couple weeks. And I went back over her initial client assessment yesterday because we met yesterday. And in the few months that we've been working together, all of those symptoms that you just described, Alex, she had those when she started our program. And we did not drastically change her calorie intake at all. And she is not experiencing any of those symptoms right now. And furthermore, from a body composition perspective, she came and she wanted to lose at the beginning of her training. It was still a little off-season approach. She wanted to lose about 5 to 8 pounds of body fat, which we were able to successfully do. And it was just quite miraculous that we didn't even really change her calorie load versus just properly fuel her prior to her workout, during her workout, post-workout. She doesn't have cravings anymore. She's not constantly thinking about food. She doesn't have energy lulls throughout the day. She's able to work full time and keep up with her child and obviously still train. So it's quite miraculous, but even just avoiding that backloading calories how it can really have multiple effects throughout the day that are beneficial.
I'm so excited for her to do Grandma's. It's coming up. I'm gonna be there as a spectator. I'm from Duluth, like I live near Duluth, so obviously I'm gonna be watching, and so I'm pumped for her to get her, because she should qualify for Boston. She should have a really great race.
One of the things I was going to say too about the like continually gaining weight for this particular client, when they say that they've gained weight, it'd be interesting to know a little bit about like how much is that, over what time period, is it cyclical? And then I would also ask you, potentially looking at doing some kind of body fat testing addition. Again, stepping away from that whole diet culture-esque talk. It's more of just gathering info so you know, and it's giving you a little bit more peace of mind. Sometimes I'll have people say, all right, let's see if we can find access to something called an in-body machine. It's a bioimpedance scale. Lifetime Fitness carries them, and any member can just step on those. But on their website, on the in-body machine website, they also have other testing locations really wherever you're at. So you can just type in your address and there's a lot of locations, but I love that scale because it tests weight, it tests body fat. It'll also look at water balance. So it can tell you a little bit too, if there is some water retention that's happening in addition to that. So Alex, you've mentioned this before in several of your Instagram posts as well, is that for every gram of carbohydrate we're eating, we're also holding onto a gram of water. So with increased training,
I think it's close to 3 grams for every gram of glycogen. It's like 2.7. So it's like almost 3 grams of water.
So not only are you getting an increase in water weight, but you're getting an increase in muscle mass. Likely you're getting an increase in actual food weight. And then there's some hormonal changes happening on top of that. So I would say step on an in-body scale if you can find access to that. And I would do that every couple of weeks. Might not also be a bad idea if this is continuing, if you're continuing to gain weight, as Mary said, maybe tracking a little bit, or getting some hormone testing done too might not be a bad idea, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, I think it's worth starting with like the fueling and the consistency. And then if things, we kind of like progress and like we start with some of the basics, the foundation of like nutrition. And then if we're still seeing continuous weight gain, then we start like looking at other pieces of the puzzle. We can't look at everything all at once, but I think for sure I would look at underfueling, consistency in fueling, doing some food journaling. Are you front loading or back loading your nutrition? Like all of those kind of classic things that we see commonly from our athletes, and kind of just starting there is usually will nip things in the bud. Okay, let's move on to our next question. This is kind of on the other end of the spectrum a little bit. Or I guess this question is pretty common, but similar to the first one. But this question is, I'm constantly eating. How do I know if I'm overfueling or not? And Hannah, let's have you tee this one up for us.
This is another, well, kind of like Mary said already, she highlighted a lot of points that I already was planning on kind of discussing, but we can kind of repeat some of that same stuff. So you could be overfueling at some points in your day, right? And then you could go through like a hybrid, as Mary said, where you're underfueling at really opportune times when you actually need calories the most, and then overfueling other times. And then on top of that, I guess I would really ask, what is giving you the sign that's telling you that you're overfueling? Is it because you're comparing yourself to what other people put on the internet? There are so many what I eat in a day videos from like all aspects of life now.
I hate those videos so much, you guys. They drive me crazy.
So much wrong with those. But they're entertaining, right? Like, even though I know that there's flaws in them, I still find myself looking at them sometimes because it's interesting.
Perfectly elaborate, beautiful meals.
So is that, right? You know, I'm just like laughing because I picture my sister who has 3 very young children, like making any meal that looks like that. She's like, no, anything that I'm eating is literally standing over the sink.
Yes, absolutely.
But I say that because I think like the messaging that you might be receiving is probably maybe telling you that you're overfueling, because I would say, and you guys can agree with me, that by and large, the athletes that we're working with, 95% of them are underfueling, right? And so if the overfueling is coming at a place where you feel like you're going to bed like stuffed, or it's going back to the weight gain piece, those would be the 2 indications that would tell me like, oh, you're probably getting some type of info that's telling you that you're overfueling. Then we have to go back to, all right, what are the tens of other factors that could be leading to the weight gain? And is it more of timing and consistency that's leading you to feel overly stuffed at certain times of the day? So it's more of like, all right, let's go back to your habits. Let's go back to the kinds of information that you're consuming online that's maybe telling you the wrong information as to why
or the people around you too. Like you might not actually like spend a lot of time with other endurance style athletes. And so like, of course you're going to eat more than a regular normal human. And so like, if you have other family members that don't need to eat as frequently or don't need to eat as high volume of meals. And people love to comment on what other people are eating. It's like, I love the eye roll, Hannah, because I can do the same thing. I'm like, mind your own freaking business, people. Yep. Like, are you training, 10 hours a week? No. Well, then there's a reason why they're supposed to be eating that much. And so, yes, it does sometimes feel like you're constantly eating and you question whether you're eating too much. I get that. But for most of the cases, like they're not. I mean, unless you're like doing that binge eating in the evening where it's kind of uncontrolled, where you tend to be more tired in the evening. So you're not going to make the best choices. Where you're refreshed in the morning, you're going to have a better mental state to put together better quality meals and snacks for yourself. So yeah, I think you can't compare yourself to like a normal average adult when it comes to your eating. You have to think of yourself as, I'm fueling myself for the training that I'm doing. I'm supporting my body. This is what it needs. And if you feel like your hunger and your eating is out of control, then that's the time to say, you know what, let me ask for some help. Let's get some clarity. Let's get some confidence in my eating choices so that you don't have that constant asking, am I eating too much? Am I eating too little? You're second guessing yourself all the time. Like that gets really frustrating and overwhelming with a world where we're already have a million things going on in our head. So sometimes just like working with someone and having that clarity can be what you need to feel confident in the food choices that you're making.
And I would say that there are two definite scenarios where you can't trust your hunger and fullness cues. And one of those would be like post high intensity training, is because you're going to get some appetite suppression, right? So in that case, it's like, even though you're feeling I'm not hungry, you do have to override that to eat to start the recovery process. The other one is when you've had really poor sleep. Your hunger and fullness cues are going to be very skewed. You too, as mothers, can absolutely attest to this. You're getting very, very little sleep. How crazy intense your hunger can be. And so there are two big scenarios there where it's like, all right, like, even if you're thinking that you're overfueling, maybe taking a look at your habits over the last few days that might have caused that increase in hunger if it starts really quickly. Like, where's my hydration? Where has my protein been at? Have I been eating fiber? And what are my sleep and stress like? And if you can check the box on all of those and be like, you know what, I've done actually pretty good with all of those, then you have to trust that hunger and you have to honor it, even if it feels weird to feel like, you know what, I'm eating a lot more than maybe what my activity feels like it says that I should eat.
And even on rest days too, I feel like when people freak out because their hunger is even more intense than on the days that they're training, and they freak out a little bit there. And I'm like, no, that's actually pretty normal, because your body's actually like looking to catch up on nutrition. And so, yeah, let's honor that hunger and fuel your body really well throughout the day so that you can fully recover and be ready to go with the next training block and feel like, a badass.
And there is about a 4-day leg for really intense training periods and how your appetite responds to that. So let's say you do a long run on Sunday. A lot of times people just really are not that hungry on long run days. I can attest to that too. I'm sure both of you can as well. When I was Ironman training, like, I would have a huge weekend and I always felt like, I exercised a lot this weekend, but I didn't actually feel that hungry. Like, it was like, the majority of your weekend was spent training. And then it was usually about like, Wednesday and Thursday of that week where I would just feel like I could just eat the pantry. Like, anything that was not nailed down, I was like, this is fair game. And there actually is that lag time period in response to activity and your hunger kind of kicking back in.
Yep.
And the other thing too, for some of our athletes, it's a huge consideration, is heading into summer. It's hot, it's humid. Even for the dry air folks at altitude, all of those things are hunger suppressants as well. And so I would add those likely to your list, Hannah, too, of you can't always trust those physiological hunger cues, because with the heat being a suppressant, that can play a huge role as well. And similar to our first, I'm making another shameless plug for food journaling, just because I do feel like it's one of the most effective tools to, even in the short term, be able to better stand meal timing, meal composition, vitamin and mineral intake, hydration goals, so many of these factors that when we meet our clients for the first time, most of them are logging for 5 to 7 days prior to our first session. And so we have information to be able to go off of and start making goals right off the bat with them. So for most clients, most athletes, again, our goal is not to get them to journal every single day, particularly long-term, but it is beneficial and advantageous for short periods of time to really help us and the athlete better understand all of these factors that are going on.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to our last question here. So this question is, I've heard the term nutrition periodization before. Can you explain that concept and how it would apply to me as an athlete? And, for you listening, if you haven't heard the term nutrition periodization, I'll kind of talk through it here as well. So I consider how we work with our athletes in having seasons within their nutrition based off of the training that you're in, because typically with endurance athletes, there's like ebbs and flows. in the training season. You're not, I mean, there's a few of our, like, especially ultra distance runners, they're like the same all year round. They don't have an off season, but having a preseason and in season and off season is pretty common with endurance athletes. And so having those different seasons of their training also means that we can periodize your nutrition and help you learn how to adjust that fueling based off of what your body is needing, based off of the season that you're in with your training. So there's always going to be like a baseline foundation with your eating style, your food behaviors, your eating habits, but it's really about tailoring that nutrition to where you're at in training intensity and training volume. And what does your off season look like? Are you still training pretty heavily in the off season? You just kind of made some shifts, or are you taking like a complete break from training like some do? Is your in season, where you've got major races in like a short period of time, or do you kind of stretch them out where you do one spring marathon, you take a little bit of a break in the summer, and then you train for a fall marathon? Everyone's training and schedule looks a little bit different, which is why it's nice to kind of periodize your nutrition based off of what you have going on. And a couple issues that I've seen and heard from with athletes is that athletes won't really periodize their nutrition, and then they tend to see some weight gain in the off season because they'll get done with a really big race. They've been eating massive amounts of food for 6 to 9 months, and it's not just a flip of a switch to go back to eating like a normal human being in the off season. And so then they end up dieting in that pre or in season to try and get themselves back to like a race weight or a leaner body comp, and that can impact performance as well, and it gets to be kind of a vicious cycle. So curious what your gals' thoughts are on the nutrition periodization concept.
I think one point that you had mentioned that stuck out was the weight gain in the off season. And I see this quite a bit with my female athletes particularly. And I think it's important to note and recognize that the weight that you kind of get to at your highest peak volume training, most of the time is probably not sustainable during the off season. And that is huge to note. Myself included. I'm a marathon trainer, and granted, I don't really weigh myself, but I can kind of go by how I'm feeling and how clothes are feeling. But I would imagine that there's probably a 5 to 6 pound difference between kind of more of that high peak training, race weight, and off season. So it's important to note this so that you're not having this false idea of expectations of what's sustainable. The other thing too is, for most of my athletes, I really don't want them weighing themselves often and frequent in season or out of season. And one of the questions I ask my athletes is, what information are you going to glean from weighing yourself that frequently? One of my female athletes was weighing herself daily, and it started to get to the point where it would really influence her mood. And she was tied to the scale. And part of that is our culture. And part of that's, kind of still those diet society thoughts creeping in. And if you're drastically changed and your mood is changed from what that scale is telling you in season or out of season, we really need to discuss a lot more than nutrition periodization and kind of what are your goals and expectations for weight and body composition long term. What are your thoughts, Anna?
Same. Yeah, I was just going to mention that too, is like, I think the biggest lie that we tell ourselves is that our body should stay the same, right? Like not only, across our lifespan, but also like do like season to season, as you said, your weight prior to, and even your body composition, your behaviors, your habits look so different in that like month leading up to a race, that couple of weeks leading up to the race, that when you think about the weight that you were maybe at your, where you felt you look the best, also think back to the habits that you were doing to stay there. Like you were probably really dialed with your nutrition. Your training volume was its highest. Maybe you were doing some of those other things like cutting out on social events because you wanted to get more sleep. You knew you had a hard workout the next morning. Maybe you weren't having as many, desserts or alcohol or whatever it was because you were so dead set on this race. Well, think of how you'd want to live, the rest of the time that year too. So the things that you are, maybe cutting out to stay a certain weight, is that worth it to you when you think about it? Another way to think about it too is like in the effort to make yourself smaller, if that's the goal, if we're relating this to weight loss, are you making your life smaller to do that? So that's one way to think about it too. And like you said, Mary, like that scale can fluctuate, even higher for depending on your current body mass, weight, and size, 10 pounds in either direction. So that can be kind of scary to see if you're constantly being really militant about stepping on a scale on a day-to-day basis.
For our athletes that really want to focus on body composition goals, and we do have a lot of them, we are always going to encourage periodized nutrition in the form of, let's focus on your body composition goals absolutely during off season. Why? Because typically we can go a little bit lower in carbohydrate intake because you're not training as much. We can cut back some of your discretionary calorie intake more. We can probably get you to strength train more, right? Because you're probably not getting in as much or in endurance and base type training. So I don't want to neglect that people want periodized nutrition goals and they want to focus on body composition goals, because many of our clients do, and we will absolutely respect that. But we just need to make sure that we're very tactful in how we approach that. And that's why it's best to work with a registered dietitian to help support that, and also understand that we really need to have realistic expectations for what the body composition trajectory is going to look like. And we need to gradually back off of that then as we're starting more of that periodized training then once you're bumping back into your regular endurance training regimen.
I want to preface too, like this nutrition periodization, like it's not meant to be anything super fancy about nutrition. It's really just about adjusting how you're fueling according to like what's going on. So like in the off season, you might not be doing as much high volume training. You might be shifting to more of like a strength training. You don't need quite as many carbs as you would in like your in season. So you just adjust to that accordingly. It's not supposed to be anything like super intense, complicated. And then obviously as you shift into like higher volume training and race season, you're going to need more carbs, but you're also still going to need like quality protein to support recovery. And you might just have to adjust the timing of things. So I'm hoping that I'm not making people feel overwhelmed. I think it's just a different concept of thinking about being intentional about the food choices you're making, having an understanding of the food choices how your food choices translate to the nutrition that you're providing your body, and how making those specific adjustments can support your goals as an athlete and also set you up for success throughout your off season so that you can go into your preseason, into your training, feeling really good about where your body's at. Like, did you see 20 pounds weight gain in the off season where, some people coming off an Ironman where they don't pay any attention to their eating, they stop training altogether, and then they come back in the tri season and they're like, whoa, I actually gained a lot of weight, and they're like trying to catch back up, and they might not get back to that, like they might not ever even get back to that old body composition that they did previously. So we're just trying to make people aware of like, be a little bit more intentional and thoughtful in how you're making those adjustments based off of your season of training can really pay off in the long run, because we want you to be able to be a badass athlete for as many years as you want to. We want you to be that like iron nun that's, I don't know, how old is she, where she's in their like 80s and still doing Ironmans, or, breaking records in your 90s, doing all sorts of running. I mean, that's what we want for people. That's what we want to be, that ourselves. And so nutrition can play a huge role in your longevity in the sport, and having that kind of like, not having it be all consuming in your life, but at the same time being intentional and considerate, and having this different concept of different seasons of how you're fueling can be helpful.
Yes, and I would say, so most recently, a little over a month ago, I did a marathon. And I think it's so very important to just honor what your body is asking for. For example, the week after the race, I was just astronomically hungry all of the time, absolutely all of the time. And I honored that. And there's this kind of grace period where you continue to back off of training and your body kind of adapts to that. And athletes often ask, how can I adjust my nutrition for the off season? And two of the biggest changes that we typically make, at least from my perspective, is reducing the volume of your meals because you're not training as much, and usually reducing the volume of the carbohydrates that you're eating. Most of the time, though, and I hold true to this as well, most of the time, I'm still encouraging regular snacks throughout the day for my athletes because I often see it better control appetite. They still feel better recovered from the workouts that they're doing, mitigate the cravings and the overeating later in the evening. So, if you're at all in the off season and thinking about a periodized nutrition approach, I do think it's just as advantageous to work with a dietitian so we can hone in on some of these factors as well. Perhaps even just as important as when you're training in season too.
It's one of the reasons why I set up the nutrition coaching program to be an ongoing coaching so that people can experience different seasons of their training with us and learn how to make those adjustments. That's hands down why I did that, is because it's not a simple like one and done appointment and you're going to be fixed. Like it is ongoing, how to adjust, how to practice and apply the things that we talk about in the program, and really getting a good handle on things so that when you do graduate from the program that you feel very confident in how to fuel your body no matter what season of training you're in. That's the goal, hands down. And you don't feel like you have to journal every single thing that you're eating for the rest of your life. 100%. Yes. I mean, that's always the goal.
Long term, I don't want my clients really feeling like they need to journal at all unless, again, it depends.
Yeah.
Carb loading in the future, if they're heading into race day and they have a better peace of mind, pre-logging their carb loads or factors like that. But by and large, most of the time, I really don't want my athletes leaving the program journaling at all.
Yeah. And at least they know what to look for then too, if they're going to do a little journaling, they've worked with us enough that they can start to pinpoint, oh, yep. We talked a lot about this in the program and I noticed I've gotten back into this old habit, need to nip that in the bud. Like those types of things just kind of help them be a little bit more aware. Love it. Ladies, thank you so much again. This was such a good chat. I love the theme of this was kind of body composition, but also just overall importance of fueling as well. So if you're listening again, I invite you to click that subscribe button, ask us questions in the comment section, whether it's follow up to what we discussed today, or if you want us to discuss a specific topic in the future, we'd love to hear from you. And thank you for listening and we'll see you soon. Bye guys.